Hello, bird nerds. I'm Grant Williams. This is the Bird Emergency. And I think today we might be going into controversy corner, or maybe even conspiracy corner. Let's see where it leads us. My guest today is Mr. Hamish Cumming, and I'll let Hamish give himself a title, a moniker. But Hamish is a landowner in Western Victoria, and Western Victoria is the last place in Victoria where you are likely, if you are lucky, to see a Brolga. Hi, Hamish. How are you? Thanks for being part of the Bird Emergency.
Good, Grant. Thanks for having us on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Now, dear listener, Hamish and one of his group, I think, reached out to me and said, hey, why don't you talk about wind farms and Brolgas? And I thought, hey, I've always wanted to talk about wind farms, especially since Jeff Kennett's beautiful quote about one of my favourite birds, the orange-bellied parrot, when he referred to it as a trumped-up Corella, when there was a big controversy about wind farms in South Gippsland. Bald Hills, I believe, was the project at that time. Now, Hamish, why are you worried about wind farms in Western Victoria?
Okay. Because of the Brolgas being raised to endangered now, there's not that many of them. That some people put forward is there's 600 or 700, but they can never count more than 400 or 500 when they do their counts. But when you look at a population that small and they're genetically isolated from the Brolgas at the north, they're different, they behave differently, they flock differently. They're a species that need saving. And if you've only got, say, 600 and some are old, they're monogamous, they lose their partners, they don't breed, some are young, you've got about 200 breeding pairs. And as wind farms have been built in Western Victoria, the one thing that's shone out is as soon as they're built, the Brolgas don't successfully nest within 5 kilometres of the turbines. And one company claimed that they had, but when we researched it, we found that it was the year before the turbines were commissioned. And then they claimed again they had, and then we researched that and found they nested 5 k's outside the wind farm and came in when it was stopped for maintenance. So there's at least 12 wind farms now operating in Brolga habitat, and all of those 12 have displaced or killed the Brolgas for a 5 kilometre radius. That means of the 200 breeding pairs that are left, 50 nest sites have been lost in 8 years, and they're planning to build more and more wind farms in the remaining Brolga habitat. And it's just one of those things. You keep building them, you keep displacing them or killing them, and you'll exterminate them.
One of the problems I've had with researching this subject, Hamish, is that there is not much available literature available to the public. But before we kick into that problem, let's just talk about Brolgas for a minute. International listeners will probably not know what a Brolga is. A Brolga is one of the 2 species of crane that live in Australia. The Brolga lives widely dispersed on the eastern side of the country, but is the only one of the cranes that lives in the state where Hamish and I live, which is in Victoria, which is the southeast pocket of the country. The Brolga, as Hamish has pointed out, has, we think, 2 distinct populations, possibly more. We don't know. They do interbreed with the Saurus crane, and the Saurus crane is widely dispersed in countries to the north of Australia. But the big problem is that they interbreed. So when we talk about Brolgas, we don't know enough about how many there really are, where they hang out, where they go, what they do. Hamish, how did you go about the process of gathering information that planning bodies and government would take notice of when you became concerned about the survival of Brolgas in your neck of the woods when more wind farms were being planned and permissions were being sought? Long question, but let's get right into that.
Okay, to start with, the first thing that we had up against us was the consultant saying, it doesn't matter if we wipe them all out in Victoria, there's plenty more in the north of Australia. And they actually put that in writing. So being very fond of Brolgas and seeing them since I could walk, basically, I did some research. I've got an engineering background and I've got a background in some computer modelling as well. And so the easiest thing to do was DNA test. So we reached out to a group of people who were interested in birds, naturalists, hunters and fishers, universities, zoos, and we said, pick up the feathers. Wherever you go, pick up the feathers. Tell us where you got them, give them to us, and we'll get them DNA tested. So the first roadblock I ran into there was the Victorian government said, no, you won't. We're not going to allow you to DNA test them. We're going to basically prevent you from doing it. So that didn't stop me. We independently raised the money, independently approached universities, and we had one that agreed to do it for us. And
can I ask, Hamish, when the government said we won't let you do it, what they were really saying was we won't let you use our facilities and we won't fund it. That was what they were telling you, wasn't it?
They were stronger than that. They told one of the universities not to accept money from us. So it was a bit stronger than that.
So I know we've got to be careful. Are you prepared to name the university did do the testing for you, that would do the testing?
There's a report that's available on the internet, which is the DNA testing of the Brolga, and it was predominantly done through a contact at Deakin University in Warrnambool, and I did have some help from Melbourne Uni, and there was a group of German scientists in Australia at the time. They assisted, and one of the things that they determined was that the Saurus crane had interbred with the Brolgas. Then they were put under pressure to say that the tests might have been mixed up or to water it down. But then 3 years later, they came out with their own report that said they have interbred with the Brolgas, and they started naming population dilution number. And it went from the first time they detected it, this is only from memory, don't nail to the wall, but from memory, the first year they did the testing, they identified 60, and by year 3 or 4, they identified 600. So it was a very rapid interbreeding, which the Brolgas in Victoria are genetically and physically isolated from the ones in Queensland and Northern Territory. So in terms of a pure blood stock of Brolga, then we can be assured we have it here, whereas in the north, it's slowly getting watered down.
Yeah, and the concern is that 98% of the Australian Brolga population is in northern Queensland. Estimates between 100 and 200,000 birds.
Yep.
But that the hybrid population is rapidly increasing, and that the hybrid population is fertile, so that it continues on. And let's give him his due. Where are we? Tim Nevitt from James Cook University was doing a lot of that work. Now, I'll jump off a little bit off topic, but the concerning thing for me with this, Hamish, is that it's a fair hypothesis that further exploration, shall we say, testing more of the population in Victoria and then integrate up through the Riverina and up towards Queensland might actually tell us that we might have two distinct species. We're more likely to find that out than not, maybe. My scientist, my non-biologist, non-zoologist brain tells me.
The problem with the Victorian population, or Victorian, Riverina, South Australia, that sort of slips into the other states. The problem with that southern Brolga population is when they did the DNA testing, they found that it is two distinct genetically separate areas. Because the Victorian ones don't travel as far when they flock and go from the breeding season to the flocking season. They don't travel as far as the ones at north because there's more water around, there's more food around, and they don't have to travel. So they found that the two genetically isolated species or families in southern Australia, and they're getting smaller. And some geneticists, I've seen reports where they say if you get below 100 breeding pairs, you may as well say the species is extinct. And we're down to 200, and that's split in two halves. So we're getting pretty close to the wall.
So we just had Malcolm's NBN let us down there a bit, Hamish. I'll just restate what I think you were saying there, is that the situation is even more dire than was accepted by the department and the known literature, in that the population that you really know about in Western Victoria, which also goes into South Australia, and may extend into New South Wales, is about 200 breeding pairs.
Active breeding pairs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's split into two, genetically isolated in Victoria as well. So when you get down to 100 breeding pairs, then it's hard to come back from extinction. And
now, sorry, most of the literature that I could find and that you also provided to me is most of the surveys that are being relied on were conducted in about 2009, 2010, and then with some further work that you've been involved in and local groups have tried to do. But is there any current literature out there, and when I say current, let's say within the last 5 years, that is widely accepted?
The Swift site, which is it's a bird site, they have the Brolga counts that they've been doing in terms of every April, theoretically, they go out and try and count the birds at the flocking sites. But you have to read that information fairly closely too, because one year they added in a count from a South Australian site, the next year they took it out, things like that. But even if you...
That's really where I was going, Hamish, is that there doesn't seem to be any work that has continually followed the same methodology and occurred at the same time so that you can compare one survey against another and that all the easily controlled variables are taken out. And
it's worse than that. One year they came up and they said, we counted 930 Brolgas. And I said, well, that's interesting, but seeing it's been 640, 660 for 10 years now, all of a sudden we've jumped up to 900. So I asked to see the count sheets and I was refused. So I did a freedom of information and I was refused. So I went to the Ombudsman and the Office of Victorian Information Commissioner, and they eventually forced DELP to give me the count sheets. And it became very clear that they hadn't done the count at the same time on the same day at the different locations. They had done it over 2 days, and I knew 3 flocks in my local area that I've been monitoring, they counted them twice because they counted them at one wetland, and then in the afternoon or the next day they counted them at another wetland. But I follow these birds around, so I knew it was the same birds. So all of a sudden, 900 became 600.
Also confused me about looking through all of the literature. And dear listener, I know it's very difficult for us to talk about stuff that I've read and that Hamish has read and that you haven't read. But most of the surveys have been done by visual counts. But there has been some work where GPS locators have been put on birds. And there seems to be less weight put on the GPS work and either a reluctance or an inability to fund further work which uses that methodology, which to me seems to be able to give a much better picture of what Brolgas do and where they go. So, Hamish, obviously very interested and have a personal investment in the survival of these populations of Brolgas. Why do you think it is that the most reliable, and again, I'll put my neck on the chopping block, I'm going to assume that method of surveying of an endangered species in Victoria would be preferable to inconsistent methodology of surveys? Have you got a view of why that it hasn't happened?
It's very inconvenient, the information that started coming out of the GPS, because in Australia, they tagged a number of Brolgas in Victoria and tagged a number of cranes in America and Canada at the same time. The GPS transponders in America and Canada ran for 6 years, 7 years, no problem. And they recorded all that data, and they came up with the fact that wind turbines displaced cranes for a minimum of 5 kilometres. They were affected by turbines up to 15 kilometres, and below 2 kilometres, if the 5% of cranes that went into the wind farms, they actually lost weight because of a nervous energy from the noise or the vibration or the something. So in America and Canada, they did that. In Australia, after the first 2 years, when the Australian information also showed that the home ranges were a minimum of 5 kilometres, up to 15 kilometres, what did Australia do? We turned the transponders off. We refused to keep recording the data because what it shows was very inconvenient, because that project was supposed to determine the home range size, and it was supposed to then buffer those home ranges from wind turbines. That was the whole point of the project. But when that project started showing that you'd have to buffer a minimum of 5 kilometres, the wind industry wants to build them within 100 metres or 400 metres of the nest sites. So miraculously, not only did the transponders get switched off and they stopped recording it, but the project's actual brief was changed to, instead of determining the home range, it was changed to how far do walking chicks go. So more than 97% of the data was not used. They used less than 7% of the data to come up with, oh, we better only buffer them 900 metres because that's how far a chick. It's not the walking the chick that gets killed by the turbines, and it's not the displacement for 5Ks.
Hamish, they're obviously headbutting the base of the turbine, causing themselves severe injury. Let's put the Brolgas aside for a minute, and I do want to come back and talk about what Brolgas do in their lives so that people can understand it. But let's talk about the wind farms. Is there now 1, 2 or 3 wind farms within the Victorian Brolgas range that are having... So there are 12 wind farms.
In the Brolgas habitat that are stopping them from nesting.
Okay. But are they causing mortality of individuals as well?
It depends who you believe, because the wind farm companies say, no, there aren't any. Not a single one has been killed. Yet witnesses have witnessed 2 getting killed at Daylesford. Witnesses have witnessed 3 getting killed at Macarthur. AGL's own reports at Macarthur show 3 have been killed, but it wasn't the wind farm that did it, of course. It was a fox or something else. So I asked for the reports, for autopsy reports, and again I was denied them, but I did get some photographs. And the photographs of the 2 chicks that died, there's nothing wrong with them in terms of this. If a fox had got them, they would have been mauled, but they weren't. They were abandoned by their parents, because I've done a study into this with the AEMO's data and a guy called Dr. Woods' reports from... He's a guy that did the reports for AGL, and it shows that every time the wind turbines were stopped in the first few years for maintenance or whatever reason, the Brolgas would come back into the wind farm and they would try to nest. But as soon as the wind came up and the turbines went over 30% output, they would abandon the site, abandon the nest. And in one case, they had a large maintenance breakdown where the turbines were stopped for nearly a month. And the Brolgas actually hatched chicks, but then they started the turbines up, and the parent Brolgas left the chicks to die. They just took off and left. So there's plenty of evidence to show there's lots of problems, but no one's owning up to it.
So here's where the problem is, because I'm assuming you are a bit like me, Hamish, in general, that you would be a proponent of wind farms instead of setting up another Latrobe Valley of coal-fired power stations in Western Victoria. That there's
I don't care if they build the wind farms. It's just they need to put them in the right place.
Yeah. So let's get that out there so that people aren't going to put tinfoil hats on us to start with there. But the problem I have with the whole process, Hamish, and why I'm really pleased that you did get in touch with me, because it's one of the things that we're going to have to confront more and more. We're talking about Brolgas, but raptors are also being knocked off by wind farms. And what we need to do is find out more about what is actually happening, and then learn and improve our practices in building and managing, locating wind farms, because this infrastructure is going to increase in its prevalence in the environment. I don't think there's any way around that. So having been through the process that you've been through, Hamish, and I congratulate you for being one of those people that will put in an FO inquiry and that will appeal a decision and that will waste hours and hours on hold trying to get information from people who just do not want you to have it. I'm making an assumption there, but I've been through the process myself.
Yeah, that's very accurate.
And it is built in a way to guard information rather than share information, which is my biggest peeve from it. Knowing what you know now, Hamish, what would you want to improve in the whole process?
The biggest thing that needs to happen is there has to be some honesty, because the government knows, the consultant knows, the wind industry knows what's happening. And with the raptors, there's been a couple of very damaging wind farms for raptors, and one of them is AGL MacArthur. And the consultants went in and got approval for that wind farm based on the fact that it would only kill 2 birds per turbine per year, and they're predominantly going to be magpies, and they will only kill 2 raptors over the entire wind farm in a year. Now, the first year it operated, it killed 10 birds per turbine per year. This is their own estimates from what they picked up and counted and multiplied by the turbines, etc. And 30% were raptors. Now, the consultant who did the work said, what we're doing is wrong. He said, we're going and picking them up too infrequently. So the foxes are going to pick up more than we pick up. So we've got to increase the number we pick up. So they went more often, and it wasn't 10, it was 13, and it was still 30% raptors. And what was happening was not only with the raptors, there were bats and other birds. So when you're looking at, there was 20 dead bats or birds per turbine per year, easily 20, you've got this huge food source. So the raptors come in to eat the food, then they get killed. And what they're finding down at MacArthur is it's a sink, because raptors are coming in and getting killed for up to 10 kilometres away. And they're killing more than 400 raptors every year down there. And it can be prevented to some degree by using a radar-type technology, which has been used in other places around the world. And when Dundonald Wind Farm was proposed, they told us in the community, we are going to put the radar technology on so that any time an eagle or a falcon or a Brolga comes into the wind farm, we will turn it off. Guess what? It's been sold 3 times. The people that own it don't want to lose money, so they don't want to put a radar on because it'll be off more than it was on.
And there's other things that don't seem to have been done, which other parts of the world are doing, which is even with the transmission lines that are necessary, that there are ways to make them visible to birds. Yep. And Brolgas are big birds. They're cranes. They're similar in mass to a pelican, but they're tall and stately. And they are known to crash into power lines. So in some parts of the world where they value their cranes, in fact, they might be iconic birds in some countries, they actually have markers, indicators that are visible to the birds in a way that power lines are not, suspended wires are not, to help avoid collisions. But I couldn't find even a study about that in Australia. Now, are you aware of anything that has been done about ameliorating the risk of transmission lines in Australia?
Again, they were supposed to do it for, and this is only recently they're starting to say they will do it, the Dundonald Wind Farm, but you go and try and find them. If I can't see them, the birds aren't going to be able to see them. But what they did at Dundonald was even worse, because the consultants, they're not allowed to have a transmission line over a wetland. So the consultants just draw the wetland smaller. And I've got a photograph of where the wetland is 1 kilometre bigger than where the consultants claim the edge is, and the power line goes over the wetland. But because it's on a piece of paper, it gets ticked off by a government bureaucrat, it gets signed off, it gets built, no one cares. There's no protection.
Now, consultant world is very small.
Yes, there's about 3 or 4 doing everything. Yep.
And my cursory look, I've got to say, I haven't exhaustively looked at all of the consultants operating in this space in Victoria, because we're talking about a Victorian population of birds.
Yep.
But it seems to be that the same firms, both sides the argument, in that they have people who are not on their staff, on their websites, but are authoring reports for the companies. So if you do a quick look, you can't see that somebody who is listed as a staff member on one of these companies is actually authoring reports for a different company.
Yeah. I've gone after one of the firms because I had a meeting with DELP and I was expressing my concerns over a particular firm, and their biodiversity manager quite openly said to me, yes, they are a gun for hire. They will write whatever the money says. So I went after that firm, and on basically a fraud type basis over one of the wind farms. And all that they did in the end was change their name. So now there's someone else. So that besmirched name isn't recognised anymore.
But they do proudly say that they used to be. So there's obviously some kudos, but look, it's the problem of being a small country, I think, in that, let's be honest about it, Hamish, people who want to protect the Brolga probably going to be members of things like land care groups and whatnot in the local community. And you can't afford to do the kind of studies that you need to go up against. So you can't get your own gun for hire because, I don't know, you probably know. I'm guessing that you wouldn't get change out of 150 grand for one of these.
I got to know some of the wind farm companies quite well over the years, as you can imagine. I've been battling against them for probably 16 years. And I was in one hearing a while ago, and the chair of the hearing said something about the solicitors that are working for them. I said, oh, yeah, we know each other. I even know his last car he bought and everything else. And they said, what do you mean? I said, we've been sitting across the table for 16 years. And I said, it's just a game to them to some degree. But the consultants concerned, they go from one project to the other. And if you have a look at the other projects some of them have worked on, if there's something controversial like a channel deepening program that the government wants to do and there's some endangered bird there, the same consultants in there saying, don't worry, it's all right. If there's a Murray water system where they want to do some channel changes and it's going to be something effective, the same consultants saying, don't worry, it's going to be all right. And one of the wind farm companies that I have got to know quite well, they told me that they were told by the government, use consultant A and your project will be approved. And it's all a part of the family.
Now, and look, I can't resist. You've referred to the department by its acronym a couple of times. Can you, just for non-Victorians, tell us what the department we're talking about is called?
Oh, gee, it's Environment, Land, Water and Planning, I think.
Now, that says everything you need to know about why the system is problematic. Mining, farming, agriculture, forestry, water quality, planning are all dumped into the same department. Sometimes the interests of the different stakeholders, and I hate the word, in each of those segments of our community diametrically opposed. And to have them all working under the one head in a government setting is problematic to begin with, because there are competitions within departments that get won. There are power imbalances within departments that get won, so that some things never see the light of day, as you've found out with all your FOIs and the appeals and whatnot that you've had to make just to get information which is on the record. And it's amazing how hard it is to find reports that are public property. People lose stuff all the time, don't they, in the department, Hamish?
They're getting more careful too, because I've run a couple of court cases and we've got another one running at the moment. And in one of the last court cases, we had a DELP person on the stand and they were asked about this meeting by the judge and the QCs. This meeting you've had that's approved this particular map and approved the buffer, blah, blah, blah. Where are the minutes? There weren't any. Where are the notes? So there's no documentation from this meeting where it was approved. Who was it with? It was with the broker from the wind farm company. Who's the broker? They used to work for DELP and they're some sort of relationship with the DELP person. Now, for these brokers, what they do now and it's not just wind farms, a lot of projects, they have a broker in the middle. And the broker, for 5% of the project value, they manage all the people like me and the councils and everything else. And if there's any loosely saying paying off or to pay
the irritants.
They do. And most times the irritants are soothed with a check or whatever else. Yeah. But they get 5%. So for one of the projects that we went and fought against, the broker got 25 million. For another one, the broker got 75 million.
Yeah. And dear listener, this is why I wanted to talk about this, because the sums are eye-watering and they're never mentioned in any of the discussions that we have. So we're talking about a possibly genetically distinct, possibly a species, distinct species, comprising 200 breeding pairs, upper estimate of 800 birds. Okay. I think we're being very generous with those numbers. Now, Are they important? That's for the community to decide. But Hamish, as an individual, and a bunch of like-minded people who are in your, let's say, local land care group or whatever. So you're talking about people who are on small acreages, making a living, the battler farmer, the small family businesses who are out there having to risk their very existence to protect birds that are community property, theoretically. No, who owns them? The community owns them. But for 5% of a project like that, you get kept in the dark.
And what it enables them to do, 5%, yep.
Yep, 5% of astronomical sums. But you mentioned that there were QCs that you get to know. Now, a QC doesn't turn up for less than $5,000 a day.
Yep.
So the process is flawed because the local volunteer group, the local land care group that has to go out there and conduct its own surveys without its own scientists, is fronting up against a project and a global organisation, because let's not bullshit each other. When you see Origin Energy or whatever energy company on the letterhead or on as the sponsor of a website like Swift, who we mentioned earlier on, that's not a mum and dad business from Warrnambool or Wandoo or Nillumbik or wherever. These are global giant corporations, and the amounts of money at stake, monumental. But to fight them, Hamish, you have to put your livelihood on the line. Is there a better way? Is there a better way in our system to manage these kind of processes?
There's a better way, but the general public either don't know, don't understand, or don't want to know. If you go and talk to people in Melbourne, they think wind farms are wonderful, and people that say they kill birds don't know what they're talking about. I've had people say to me, and it's a common one, more birds are killed by cats than are by turbines. I said, next time you see a cat pull down a wedge-tailed eagle or a Brolga, let me know, because we're talking different birds that are getting killed. We're talking iconic large birds, not the sparrows in your backyard. And the reason why the government and the companies use the broker is having the broker, there's nothing recorded on the government book, so there's nothing you can get from FOI. There's nothing recorded on the company's books because it's ACCC. So
thank you for going there, because the process has now been bastardised to protect vested interests from scrutiny. This is my problem with the way it operates, and it doesn't matter which colour of government you have. So let's get that right out here too.
No. And to some degree, and as much as a lot of people might think this is a bad thing to say, but the green groups and green parties, to me, they're worse, because at least the other parties, they tell you they're going to stick your hand in your pocket and do you over. The Greens say we're going to protect the world and the animals, but they still won't do anything to do that.
And I feel terribly naive saying it, but the problem is the money. The problem is the money. And what you just said about the people complaining about cats is also part of the problem, is that we've been conditioned to not be able to deal with a couple of things at once. And the fact that my neighbour's cat goes out and kills birds at night because they're irresponsible and they won't keep it in should not preclude me from giving a shit about Brolgas. And the fact that you haven't been able to get too much traction about this is concerning, but I also think it's because of the kind of people, and I've got to be careful how I phrase this, because I don't want to, I'm talking about who the constituents are that are affected by or that come in contact with these populations of Brolgas. There ain't no marginal seats here. Let's put it that way. I don't think that protecting the Brolga is going to see Wannon swing to the Greens or to the ALP. And that's part of the problem, because there is no political heft that you have other than, and I'll put it out there, the network, the informal network in your part of Victoria is probably not the pinko network that I have, Hamish.
No, but I've got friends who are in Pinko network,
And I'm not making it a personal thing about you, Hamish. And
I know exactly what you mean, but
I very clumsily put these things out there often and can get a kicking for it.
no, that's okay. That's okay, because I've got friends in Melbourne that are in the Greens, and one of them took one of my documents that I'd put together about what's happening with the Brolgas and everything else, and they took it to a Greens meeting in the city, and they got up and said, here's a report done by a concerned citizen over the fact that wind farms are killing birds and displacing birds. All they need is a 5K buffer, and this species will probably survive. And the person took the report in front of the room full of people, threw it in the bin, and said, he's probably paid by the coal industry. Didn't even read it, didn't look at it, just made an assumption. And this person, who's been going to those meetings and as a member and everything else for 10 years, said, what's the last time I'm going? Because you're not even listening.
Yeah. And this is the problem that exists in when the whole process is secret. Now, let's see if we can provoke a cat or two. Who's your federal member for your seat, hey?
Dan Tehan, and I...
Okay, now Dan Tehan is a minister in a cabinet minister, so it's not like he doesn't have any clout. What about in the Victorian Parliament?
Victorian Parliament, we've got Richard Riordan, who's been quite supportive in terms of for instance, he lobbied to get the power line underground at Moreton and things like that. So he's been successful in that.
And Richard Riordan is representing which party?
He's a Liberal, yep.
Okay. And is he the lower house rep?
Oh, gee. Now you're getting me on the politics.
Well, you've got lower house and upper house representatives. So
we have another one.
You have at least 3 representatives.
Yeah, we have a member for Western Victoria who's Andy Medic.
Which colour suit does he wear?
He's supposed to be independent, but he tends to vote more with the government than anyone else in Victoria.
Okay, so he wears pink pajamas, are we going to say? Okay, so now what I just want to tease out is, have any of these representative politicians been representing your view? Are any of them fighting for the Brolga?
Yeah, Richard Riordan has been, and he's done things in Parliament. Dan Tehan hasn't, and in fact I've been commenting on Dan Tehan's Twitter page of late because he's allowed something very strange to happen with the wind industry, where the government's future fund has bought out one of the larger outfits, and then within 6 months, somehow miraculously, after paying $2.8 billion for an asset that's worth $800 million, that particular company is now back in control of it, and it's off the share market. And that just boggles my mind. And I regularly write to Dan Tehan on his Twitter page and say, you oversaw this. How can you allow that?
We both know the answer to that. Hamish cannot say it because we cannot defend it. Look, I'm very exasperated, and I think we have pointed out the problems. Let's talk about any positives that we can draw out of what's going on with Brolgas in your neck of the woods, Hamish. Who are, apart from yourself, who are the voices of the Brolga, and are there sufficient safe sites? Are landowners doing the work that the government should be doing in protecting the species?
There are a number of safe sites, as you call them, and concerned individuals, but at the moment around Moreton and Willatook and places like that where there are still large Brolga populations, there's also proposed wind farms. And both the Mount Fynes project, which is near Moreton, and the Willatook project, which is fairly close to Macarthur, the landholders are protecting their birds, are voicing their opinions, and they're getting comments back from the companies like, you're only new to the area, you wouldn't know. Well, they've been there 15 years, and that's new enough for them. And the girl's husband's been there for about 30, 40 years, and they're refusing to put on their project protected areas nest sites that people go out and photograph and give them and record with the DELP database, and the big companies are just ignoring them. So yes, there's some safe sites left, but there's turbines proposed to be right in the middle of them, and they're fighting for that at the moment. That's why we're saying 5K buffer. Just give us the 5K buffer. Put them where you like, but give us the 5K buffer.
Have you got a rail trail down there, Hamish?
Not close by to us. There's probably the closest rail trails. Yeah.
But you know about the concept. I'm just thinking maybe there needs to be a Brolga trail, an informal.
12 years ago, I put that to the government. I drew a map, and and said, if you keep the turbines out of there, you're going to protect 90% of the birds. It got taken to government by 3 times. It got taken to government by people from within the planning department of DELP, and 3 times the minister said, no way.
Now, let's take it out of the hands of government, because they're always going to, doesn't matter, like we've said, it doesn't matter which colour government you've got, they're going to be leaned on. Let's get an informal Brolga trail, and let's 3 times a year take people to see Brolgas. Let's do it so that it's visible and that more people see Brolgas. I'm a bird nut, Hamish. I've never seen a Brolga in Victoria.
Really?
I've never seen a Brolga in Victoria, and I know those Western districts quite well. And I've been down there many times, but I have never seen Brolgas.
I see them every day on my farm.
And people should be coming. The reason I said the rail trail and brought it up is that people will be aware that a lot of regional areas in Australia have said, come and ride your bike or put on your backpack and walk along the disused rail trails and see a lot of the stuff that you can't see in our region when you're on the bitumen, when you're driving around. Why don't we do something informal like this? Why don't we do 3 weekends a year, breeding and non-breeding? Get a bunch of people with bikes or however and come and see some Brolgas and publicise the bejesus out of it, and then nobody can say they're not there.
Yeah.
I am your vessel, Hamish, or vessel for this, because this is what drives me bonkers, is that the Brolgas that are there are a bloody tourism asset. Bird nerds travel to see birds.
Yeah, that's why I started the Twitter page up again and just putting photographs of the birds that are basically on our farm, and I retweet other people's as well. But when you're protecting the Brolga or a Brolga wetland, you're also, on our farm, there's over 60 other species that use the same wetland, and there's migratory birds and other birds that come and go. But if you protect that one wetland, you're protecting 60 species, not just the Brolga.
Now, we've got some people who are with us live. I'd be interested to know if those people, and stick a comment or something in there for us. Have you seen a Brolga in the wild? And would you like, if you knew where to go, if you could rock up to Hamish's place and have a barbecue and talk to Hamish about Brolgas, would you think that would be a good way to spend a weekend? Checking out the unknown places of Western Victoria and seeing some Brolga chicks? Hopefully they're not running headfirst into bases and doing themselves terrible injury. Here we go, for sure. There we go, Hamish. I can tell you that a very substantial proportion of our viewing audience have said yes. So that's as scientifically valid as half of the surveys being done. Don't let that idea die, Hamish. Don't let that idea die, because is an iconic species. We've only got 2 cranes, unless genetic testing tells us otherwise, that we might have our own special Victorian Brolga. Who knows? The
thing is, they're so old too. The species is, they've done dig up, what do you call it when the guys dig up the dirt and measure the age of bones and things?
Archaeology.
They did a dig in Nebraska and they found the cranes were 10 million years old. Now, the Australian crane is believed to be older again, because the Australian crane is the only one in the world that's got a tear duct that can help them they can drink salt water. It's the only one in the world that can drink salt water. And it's thought that it is older than 10 million years old. And what really grots me is they're going to build wind farms that have got a life for less than 20 years and exterminate a species that's managed to survive for 10 million years so far.
And there's another thing that I'm sure would shock people. A wind farm has an economic life of less than 20 years.
Oh, it's much less. MacArthur's been running 9, and it's half of those turbines are down at the moment, and they've got 30 or 40 gearboxes out. They've got to change the blades on a lot. So you're looking at, it's more like 15 years before they should be pulled down.
Yeah. So there are huge issues. Now, I might be asking you to dob in your friends and neighbours here, Hamish, and I'm going to do something I always want to do, which is ask completely inappropriate questions. But let's look at the economics of being a landowner in your area. What are you running? You're running sheep, I'm going to guess, is your main
No, we've got a few sheep, but we mainly run cattle and do cropping.
Okay, so So you're doing cattle and cropping.
And we're organic because I don't want chemicals or fertilizers in the Brolgas wetlands. So we're USDA NOP organic certified.
Okay, so you're already taking the sort of action that we wish everyone would be taking around the world, but it'll come. But what can you and your neighbours expect to earn? Let's look at maybe a 5-year average per hectare from farming.
Like every year is different. Like I always work on the theory that you make good money 1 year in 5, you break even 2 years in 5, Hamish, and you lose money 1 year in 5.
Yeah, but you've got to have averages. If we kicked it out to 10-year average, would you have a where I'm going with this? I'm not trying to get the tax department to be looking over your shoulder at your accounts. What I'm getting at is you can make an awful lot of money by being a proponent of wind farms on your property. And
you'd make
better per hectare to be a wind farmer than to be a farmer. Is that
and that's what they get people, and they target quite often. They target older generations of farmers as well, and which is a bit mean because they are more trusting and believing when they say this won't cause you a problem or that won't happen or you get money for here. And I know one guy, and he was promised 60 turbines on his property, and he was promised $20,000 a turbine per year. And that's more money than he would see in 20 years of farming. So he took it on.
50 years of farming.
Anyway, so he took that on. But anyway, what happened was by the time it got through planning and everything else and they eventually built them, he didn't get that many. He got 8. So he thought, 8 times 20,000. But the company said, hang on a minute, read the fine print. That's dependent on the price of the REC. That's depending on us being profitable. That's dependent on this. It's dependent on that. So he ended up getting $4,000 a year for much less turbines. And he says, worst thing he'd ever done because it split his farm up, done everything and that doesn't achieve it. He can't live in his own house because of the noise. He has to move off his property and all these other negatives because what was promised and what he signed up for, and his own fault because he didn't read the fine print, but what he signed up for was very different in his mind to what he got. But there are some landholders that are getting what they were told and getting paid well, depending on the company. But as the turbines get older, and you've got like down Codrington now where they're in their 22nd year or something, and literally you drive past and they're rusting and there's oil pouring out of them, and you look up their generation, they're very poor generating. One of the farmers down there was saying that this year they're not even getting their payment that they were promised because they're not economical.
Hamish, where these wind farms reaching maturity, the end of their economic life and their structural life, really, are they going to be replaced by new turbines or do the companies look for a fresh victim?
At the moment, we don't know because the Codrington is going to be the first one to go down the chute, so to speak. But around the world, what has happened is they don't repower that site because the towers are too small for the new turbines. They won't take the weight. The wiring's too small to take the power out. So you have to basically start from fresh anyway. And if you're going to start a fresh site, then you want a better site than the one that you got approval for 20 years ago, which is now causing you heaps of trouble.
Is this going to be like what's happened with the mining industry, where in the next 20, 25, 30 years, we're going to see all around the country and all around the world these dinosaur turbines, which are not being used, that then become the landowner's responsibility to tear down and remove? Or
in America,
are companies on the hook?
No, the company's not on the hook. In America at the moment, there's over 6,000 turbines that aren't operating and that are rusting away. In Australia, if you read the fine print on the contracts, there's supposed to be a fund created in the last 2 years of the 25-year life to dismantle the turbines and remove them off site. But in the contracts after that, it says, if for any reason the company is insolvent or moved on or has left the site, it's the landholder's responsibility.
So landowner is on the hook. The landowner. Yeah. So it is just like mining, and that in the end you'll have. Let's look at the Western Districts. Dan Tehan will have. Let's say there's 50 or 70 landowners, and it won't be Dan Tehan. It'll be his grandchildren or something. That's the way it works down there, buddy. So actually, it'll probably be Malcolm Fraser's bloody great-grandchildren or some. Dan's just keeping the seat warm. But he'll have a whole lot of unhappy constituents saying, we've got these dead bloody dinosaur wind turbines clogging up our farm and our beautiful view. Please, can you make the taxpayers of Australia tear them down and re-beautify our farm? And that's what's going to happen. And it's going to be just like mining. The mining company will go broke. We can't afford to do the amelioration and restoration of the site like our contract says. But unfortunately, we're broke. So guess what? Taxpayers of Australia, welcome to the mine.
The contracts are supposed to put that on the landholder, but Richard Reardon did a piece in the Weekly Times a couple of months back now, and he did the maths for what it costs to take them down if the companies walk away and what the landholder gets for the rent for the 25 years. And the 25 years rent did not come close to them down.
But again, that's my point with and why we should be having the discussion. We're in an election cycle here. These are things that need to be discussed. The landowner's on the hook, but the 70, 80, 100 landowners, however many it is, are not going to be the ones who want to pay. They're going to go to federal representative or state representative and say, this isn't fair. The companies never put the fund together and the money isn't there. It's not fair that we do it. So please, can we have the community do it for us? And that's why the game is rigged. It's rigged. It's always rigged. It makes me angry. And what we really should be doing is just getting together and going, we need wind, we need solar, we need batteries. How can we do them in the best way and in a way that we can future-proof against the potential damage in the years to come so that we can still have Brolgas and we can still turn our lights on? Do you think we know enough to do the two?
No, it's too much money and too much greed. But if you have a look on my Twitter page a few days ago, I did a AEMO fuels burnt for energy used printout straight off the AEMO site. And over the Easter weekend, we were running 90% on coal still. And we've spent $7 billion on wind farms in Victoria. We've spent billions of dollars on batteries and power lines and everything else. And in 9 years, we're still running 90% coal. And guess what the rest of it was? Hydro. So we weren't, what they're doing doesn't work. But that's a whole different argument. My argument is don't eliminate a species in the process. Do what you like, build what you like. I don't care. But just give us 5K buffer.
See, power is such a fraught problem because when we privatised it and we divvied up the market into a whole bunch of corporate entities that own stuff, theoretically own stuff, it meant that we took away from the community the opportunity to do what individuals in the community might like to do, so that you and I cannot make individual decisions about how we produce and consume power. And I think that was probably one of the stupidest things that we've done as a community, in the community that you and I live in. And it's been repeated around the world and certainly in Australia. You can't make a decision about how you will connect to the power grid without the interests of a global corporation being the paramount interest in that decision.
Unless you go off-grid completely.
Well, that's it. You have to completely disconnect from the community asset that your family, my family, that their ancestors invested in and built up.
You could take that to the manufacturing, to refining oil, to everything. Everything that was built after the Second World War is now being pulled apart and they're not replacing it with anything.
It's really sad. So Brolgas, I'm coming back to birds. When's the best time for someone to come down to the Western Districts to see your Brolgas?
It depends if they want to help plough the paddock and do the fences and everything while they're here. Otherwise, my day's going to be shot. Nesting time is generally, it can be any time of the year depending on rain. We've had them nest in January. We've had them nest in December. But generally, they nest between probably June and the end of November to start of December. And they will start to flock depending on, again, availability of food and size of flocks and things like that. I've had them start as early as September, but normally it's about January, and they flock through till about this time of year.
And you mentioned that they're monogamous, so Do they mate for life as far as you know?
Yeah, they think they mate for life. And from what I've seen with the ones on our farm, and because we're also got 2 flocking sites on our farm as well, so we see birds and you recognise some of the birds. Everyone says they're different, but you can recognise different birds that come and go. And we've got this one poor old chap. He's been coming for 5 years on his own and leaving on his own because he lost his mate. But they live for, I don't know, 35, 40 years old. So just because there's 600 birds, it doesn't mean there's 300 nesting pairs. No. That's why, because there's monogamous ones that have not got a mate, there's ones that are just too old to breed, and there's young ones
that are probably too young, still learning how to get a date. That's
right. So that's why conservative estimate of 200 breeding pairs left I don't think is too far off.
Now, someone known to you, Hamish, has just popped in a comment. Thank you, Ian Penner, for actually putting me in touch with Hamish. Green Swamp, which is managed by the Nature Glenelg Trust, is a good place to see Brolgas.
At the moment, there's a flock of about 200 there, apparently, yeah.
So if I'm heading down to Western Victoria, where would I find Green Swamp?
I'm pretty sure it's on private land, so I'm not sure you're going to find it without contacting the landholder and going in, but it's not far from the Grampians.
All right, let's extend that point, because I've been encouraging people to go and see Brolgas. Are there public lakes, public flooding sites that can reliably see them?
Yeah, there's one near Geelong, and you can just drive in there on the public road. I think it's
Connewarra.
Yeah, you can see them there. You can see them on the sewage treatment plant. There's a couple in there. It's another place, Bull Lagoon, which is public. But that's, again, it's a bit pot luck. They're pretty big areas, and you've got to know what you're looking for and everything else. But in terms like just farmland like us, we've got 2 you can see from the road. Most of them are on private land. They're a very private bird. Like the ones that even on our place you can see from the road, if a car pulls up, immediately they got their heads up, they're looking around, and they'll start to walk away. And even though their nest is 300 metres in, you'd need to look with binoculars. But as soon as a car pulls up on the road, they start moving away. And so, yeah, you'd need to be with someone that knew how to look at them without disturbing them and what vantage point. Otherwise, you're going to do more damage than good. You might see a Brolga, but you might disturb their nest.
Yeah, so let's reiterate that point, that when the birds are breed, you don't want to be crisscrossing the Western Districts in your looking for Brolgas. People don't often think about that, Hamish. We don't know enough about the birds to... in the general consciousness, it's not like the Japanese and their cranes and they're having festivals and storks in Europe and whatnot. Brolgas are just invisible to us these days. They're almost a myth, the dancing Brolga and all that. But who's seen them? Yeah. I'm a bird nerd. I haven't seen them. Now, bird watchers are weird sometimes, Hamish, let's be honest. And I don't want us to be encouraging if it's going to do damage, ridiculously done earlier.
You have to be fairly careful. You have to be so disturb them. Which is funny because
sorry,
I was going to say it's funny because I'm there every day, and my ute, they know my ute, and I can get within 20 metres of them because I'm there every day. And if I'm ploughing a paddock, they'll come in and walk in behind the tractor. And when I'm doing the hay, they walk in front of the mower, hoping to get a mouse to come out or something like that. And so they choose when they want to be around you. But if you violate their nesting site or where they are sleeping, then they can move off. Yeah.
That was one of the next things I wanted to ask you about. Is it their habits? Have they got a distinct roosting place compared to where they go and congregate to feed? Like, they know you know them well. What does a Brolga do on your place during the day?
Depending on the season, they like it 6 to 8 inches of water. So they will have 3 favourite wetlands where they will nest or sleep. So this time of year, it's been quite dry. They'll go to Site A because Site B is already dry. Now, if we get a wet winter, Site A and B are too deep, so they'll nest in sites. So they have that ability to move around between spots. But I've had a pair of Brolgas, and I don't know how they do it, and I've had swans do the same thing, where there's a rain event coming, and they'll start building a nest, and they move it. They'll move it onto dry ground, and the next day, it's got water around it. You think, and where they were building it originally, it's underwater. You go, how do they know?
they know that. Well, it's one of the great mysteries, isn't it? How do birds from all over Australia know to head to somewhere that's about to flood so that they're there when the flood arrives to start breeding? We just don't know.
We get migratory birds here from Siberia, from China, from Alaska, from Japan, and they come to
you're
wetlands.
Snipe. I'm guessing you're getting snipe. What else are you getting?
There's all sorts of things, sandpipers and we even get the ones from New Zealand that come across here in the winter and different things. There's little plovers, banded. I think they're a banded plover.
The banded plover, double-banded plover.
Yeah, but what we found, because we've set up here we're here for the Brolgas, and we farm to pay for the Brolgas and to buy more land to put underwater for more Brolgas. But
do you hear that, people? Hamish does more for the Brolgas than anybody in our government does, and he does it off his own back. This guy, fetting.
What we've found is the Brolgas know that we've got a good food source. So if you listen to the consultants, they'll say a Brolga has a territory of 1,200 acres and they won't do this, they won't do that, they won't go into the other area. It's a load of rubbish. We've got 2 Brolgas nesting in the same swamp, and one of our neighbours has got 2 nesting in the same one as well, because there's not much around to nest, so they nest where they can. And we have, one day I've got a photo of 8 Brolgas that came in from other surrounding nesting areas to feed on our place during the nesting season. And I've got a photo of them all together in the same spot feeding. And the consultants will say this doesn't happen, but I've got photos of it happening. And halfway through the day, they all flew out. They swapped over their nest's partner, and their partner flew in. And I tracked some of them. I drove and followed them as they flew. And some of them came from 7 and 8 kilometres away just to feed on our place and turn around, go back, swap over on the nest, and the partner come and feed because we had the food supply.
You know what that tells me, Hamish? You're organic. You got the best frogs, mate.
But then they want to build a wind farm right next to it to have turbines within 300 or 400 metres from a nesting site, claiming they don't nest there, and then we're in another argument and fighting for the next 5 years.
Okay, now the bird emergency is all about information, spreading information, gathering information, sharing information. If you've got some information about Brolgas, contact me. I want to get on the Brolga hobby horse. And hey, if you think Hamish is wrong and you're a Brolga expert, look me up, grant@thebirdemergency.com. And let's go down the Brolga rabbit hole, because I was surprised when and Hamish hunted me down. I didn't know there were that many Brolgas still in Victoria. I thought the Brolga story in Victoria was basically after a big rain event or some flooding, we'll get eruptions of Brolgas. Now, I'm a bird nerd. How can anybody who is not already invested have any clue about this? Hamish, are the local councils promoting Brolgas? Are Brolgas part of the Western Victorian story?
Our council, unfortunately, is the other way. There's been 3 overseas trips to councillors and officers paid for by the wind farm companies. There's 2 council employees, get this, employed to look at permit compliance. And guess who's paying their wages? The wind farm companies. No compliance.
Okay, let's call them out. The councils are which councils?
Our council here is the Moyne Shire, and I'm constantly at battle with them about permit compliance and Brolgas, because they just will not force the wind farm companies to adhere to the permits that are even written, let alone do any other protection.
Now, I'm sure the general public aren't aware of this either, that the people who are charged with making sure that permit conditions, be it for any kind of development, but the people who are charged with monitoring and enforcing the regulations are being paid to go on overseas trips by the very companies that they have to monitor and potentially write a ticket again. Or
one particular project, the councils are responsible for writing out the permits to remove native vegetation. And this particular project had a permit to remove 5 hectares. In the first 2 weeks, they removed 20. So I got onto the council and said, hang on a minute, they have a permit for 5. Come and look, come and stop this. And they refused to. In the end, they cleared 60 hectares of native vegetation, some on Crown land, some on Vic Roads land, some on council land, and some on private property. And to this very day, the council refuses to go and look at the damage and make the company pay for mitigation or compensation. And in the permit that the council wrote, they wrote that they will not go and follow up and look at it. They'll rely on the wind farm company telling them what they've done. Now, can you imagine a building permit for your house or doing your sewer?
Actually, yes, I can, because that's all been privatised too. But, dear listener, you will be shocked to know that the company that we have not named, but the company that was involved in a lot of this research and that Hamish has a very special place in his heart for, be shocked to know that their services include native vegetation assessments, threatened flora assessments, fauna assessments, offset planning, and approvals. Right? The system.
And you have to read their reports. You have to read the reports carefully too, because most people read the summary and the conclusion and nothing in between. And one document was 3,000 pages, and they got paid a lot of money. Like they got paid $200,000 or $300,000 to do this particular report. And one adjustment, the company who they did it for told me overnight they had to do an adjustment, and they charged them $20,000 for the adjustment. But in the summary of the report,
which is probably 2 sentences.
In the summary of the report, it says they're going to pick up and remove and relocate legless lizards and dunnets and things like that from in front of the bulldozers to ensure that they're relocated somewhere else. When you read the body of the report, it says the government no longer allows the relocation of species because it doesn't work. Therefore, we're not going to do it. But if you read the summary of the conclusion, you would think, oh, that's wonderful, it's all right. But when you read the body, it's not going to happen.
Look, Hamish, it's depressing, isn't it? Because and often you can only get publicly available for free an abstract and a conclusion, and you can't actually get the body of the report without forking out $1,000 or something, which...
They wanted $7,000 for one of the things that I asked for. No, and the ombudsman said, no, you're giving it to him for nothing, which was good.
Yeah. Thankfully, we've got an ombudsman. We haven't done a lot of birds today, Hamish, but this is part of the problem. We're always talking about offsets, and there's just so much guff talk where people hide behind the processes. Why I was really keen to talk to you, and thanks, Ian, for hitting me up on Twitter, which is the best place to find me, at Bird Emergency. You'll always find me having a rant on Twitter. The process is broken. The public information process is skewed. It's not only flawed, it's biased in favour of the people who have a vested outcome always in mind. Where we can get information, and I'm not having a shot at Swift because they're doing the best they can. But hey, Origin Energy is a sponsor of theirs. It's so whatever they do, and I'm not saying that they've been nefarious or anything like that. I'm not saying that at all. They have to bear in mind what a sponsor will like and won't like, because they need to get the money to have their website and to pay their phone bills. And you know, the system's broken. All the stuff that the government should be doing has been outsourced to people who don't have the community interest at front of mind. I'm not saying they're all bad or whatever, but the system is now broken and we need to take it back. And Hamish, you should not have to fund it on behalf of the community. That's my big problem. Thank you, and thank you, Ian, and all of the volunteers. Hey, let's give the land care groups and whatnot in the area a shout out. Who's doing all the sort of restoration and re-veg work and whatnot in your area, Hamish?
Yeah, there's not a lot happening unless it's done on private landholders with private landholder money. The companies are supposed to do it.
So who's doing it? I want to recognise those people who are out there putting their own money and their own time into preserving the birds, since our state and federal governments are not doing it adequately.
Yeah, it comes down to private landholders and people that are prepared to put some money in. Some of the CMAs will help with part funding things. The Nature Glenelg Trust will help sometimes to fund things, but it's predominantly the landholders themselves. And you're saying we're spending our own money. Yeah, we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees alone. And I started a GoFundMe page more than a year ago now, and I think we've only raised the 11,000. I set a target of 600,000 because that's what a court case can cost to go through to the end. If you speak, particularly if you appeal or lose and have to pay other people's costs. And one of the local groups put the hat around, and they raised $30,000 or $40,000. The GoFundMe page raised 11, but still, personally, we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we shouldn't have to, because we've got government departments that are supposed to be doing what we're doing.
That's the point, Hamish. That's the point. We probably could have done this in 10 minutes. The point is, people, that no matter where you live, probably the system is now rigged against someone like Hamish. He's got birds who hang out on his farm who need protection, and he's had to spend, let's not beat around the bush, an absolute shitload of money. More money than most people will be able to save in their entire lives to protect the Brolga, because our governments don't do it. So please do something. If you can't do everything, but please do something. Hamish, where would you like people to direct their attention if they want to assist you? What's the GoFundMe page?
If you just go onto GoFundMe and look up, just put the word Brolga in, it'll come up. Brolga, it'll come up. And that's to try and get the consultants accountable. That's a court case we want to run in the future. But that's the financial side. But the other side that people can do is get stuck into Lily D'Ambrosio and the Secretary of DELP, John Bradley, and say, demand a 5K buffer. It's not hard. It just means you don't put as many turbines in that spot. You move them somewhere else. That's not a hard thing to ask.
Sometimes I feel sorry for the minister. Lily D'Ambrosio is the minister responsible for conservation and forestry and wind farms and all the other stuff that seem like they shouldn't be in the same portfolio. She can't protect the greater glider. She can't protect the leadbeater's pods. She just can't do it because we're captured. As a community and whatnot, we're captured by these industries.
But she's trying to put in a new standard at the moment, a new standard to supposedly protect Brolgas. And we've held it up for over a year now because it's just full of rubbish. And in the standard, she's claiming that Brolgas don't use saline wetlands. Now, their own reports for this area show Brolgas nesting, feeding, breeding and flocking in saline wetlands, but they're trying to say they don't, so that the wind farms can build in those areas. And the Brolga is the only crane in the world that can drink salt water. And they just make all these ludicrous claims in this standard that they want to introduce. And it's nothing to do with protecting the Brolga. It's to eliminate Brolga out of the picture so the wind farms can build what they like. She's in a position where she can do something positive, and she's doing the reverse.
Yeah. Look, it's just frustrating, Hamish. I hope people will exert some pressure. It's not still open for comment or anything, though, is it?
No, and they're refusing to publish people's comments, and they were supposed to be published 15 months ago. They were supposed to go on public comment, a public display, and they're refusing to even and put them out.
It was out for comment until the 18th of December in 2020.
Yep.
And they're still not public, are they?
No. And it's probably because we've got them in court over the Golden Plains wind farm, and I would imagine they'll be waiting to see the outcome of that before they try their next trick.
Look, I don't know. Do you know if the email still works? brolgawwind.standardsreview@delwp.vic.gov.au. Let's put that out there.
I don't know if it'll still work. You're better off to write directly to Lily D'Ambrosio or John Bradley, the Secretary of DELP, John Bradley. He's probably the key one.
You can find Lily on Twitter. I know they monitor her account pretty close.
You can find John on Twitter too.
Can you? Okay. I will tweet him out later in the day. Hamish, please tweet to me what you would like me to put out later in the day, and I shall do. But please, in your discourse with ministers and secretaries of departments and everything, be more polite than me. Please.
I'm accused of being very blunt.
I just get a bit ranty and sometimes a bit sweary. I can't help it when I get so angry. But should I care less about the Brolgas? No, I bloody well shouldn't care less about the Brolgas, and all of us should be caring more and keeping an eye on these processes. We've got them now. We have to operate within them, and if you care, you actually have to do something. And in an election period like we're in now is the time when everybody's antennas acutely attuned to what people are saying. If you live in the Western Districts of Victoria and you care about Brolgas, tell Dan Tehan that you care about Brolgas. If you don't live in the Western Districts of Victoria and you care about, tell your local representative that you care about Brolgas. Just get on Twitter and let them know. Send them an email if email's your thing. Get on their Facebook page or whatever. And support Hamish. Support Hamish's GoFundMe. Put in Brolgas and you'll find it. And what about your Landcare, community Landcare group or something? Hamish, do you want to give them a shout out? I'm sure they're doing good work, even if it's not about Brolgas.
Yeah, they're good. It's our local one here, I guess, is based around Lismore now. So it's a fairly wide area. But yeah, they've done a number of things for Brolgas. They've put in submissions, which we give them a hand if they need that, to do some protection up on the Carambolic Road and a few other places. And yeah, they've got some fairly active members in the group that do care, which is good.
Great. Nature Glenelg Trust as well. Ian has pointed them out. The Green Swamp. Go and have a look. And hey, if you're a budding ecologist or zoologist, botanist, biologist, and you want to hone up your skills and whatnot, there's people like Hamish who need your expertise and need your help. Hey, jump on my Twitter at Bird Emergency and you will see a lot of these people being highlighted. Get involved. Just get involved. You can't do everything. Just bloody well do something. Okay? Hamish, thank you so much for being part of the Bird Emergency. Ian, thank you for putting me in touch with Hamish. Dear listener, thanks for being part of the Bird Emergency. Hamish, what's your Twitter?
That's just my name, just Hamish Cumming.
Easy. So, thanks, everyone.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Hamish. You're a bloody hero, mate. Good on you. See ya.
Bye.